To further discuss this, I'm joined by Aaron John, Executive Director, Center for Climate Action, Innovation and Engagement. Hello, Aaron. Thank you for joining us at this time.
Hi, Dashin. Good evening.
Aaron, tell us, what role does climate change play in the increasing frequency and severity of flooding in Nigeria? How can we mitigate its impact?
So thank you. So because our atmospheric temperature would increasingly get hotter with the impact on climate change, it means that more water would evaporate and the atmosphere would hold more water. So increasingly, we'll begin to see more rainfall as the years proceed, and as that water comes down with other effects, it reduces the amount of drainage and drains that our lands can take. So what happens is that you see our rivers being overflow, and then you see the runouts causing flash floods elsewhere. Our other activities like inadequate waste management will also exacerbate this and makes it much more difficult for our rivers to drain these waters and into the ocean and the seas. So this is one of the major causes of the floods that we see. Socioeconomic development issues are also a very fundamental part of this, right? We cannot 100% put this on climate change. While climate change is happening, the lack of our infrastructural preparedness actually makes this worse, and it increases our vulnerability to the impact of climate change. I was listening to your correspondents in the field, and it's very disheartening to see that the preparations that we make for things like this are usually IDP camps. So what happens when IDP camps also get flooded? The fact that IDP camps exist, it is not at all preparedness for flood, because this has happened since 2012, for example, and
Uh,
our only mitigant cannot be IDP camps.
all right, Aaron.
So while that is,
Yes,
yeah,
sorry to cut you short. Let's talk about the periodic opening of Cameroonian dams, which has been cited as a major cause of flooding in Nigeria. How can regional cooperation and water resource management be improved to minimize the risks associated with dam operations?
I'm happy you actually brought up water resource management, right? Because when the dam in Cameroon was being considered for construction, we were also considering the Hausa Dam in Adamawa. But it so happens that 4 decades later, we haven't finished the dam, and the Cameroon Dam has been completed. So what is happening is really not about the Cameroon Dam, really, but it's about our own lack of fulfillment on our own infrastructural obligations to ensure that we're able to offset this, right? We have the integrated water resources management infrastructure that we have and institutions in Nigeria, like the Ministry of Water Resources, the River Basin Management Authorities, and what have you. These are all put in place to ensure that the cooperation between both internal and external organizations that control, water, are managed effectively. So that structure does exist. Now, the understanding of what these organizations are supposed to do in and out of Nigeria is where the issues come around, right? And how are we also progressing with our own expectations of how to offset the water that comes out of Cameroon? Because Cameroon would not stop releasing its dam, the water from its dam, right? So how are we preparing ourselves to offset that water and collect it? There is some supposed MOU that was signed between us and the Cameroonian government to be able to have this possible. But whether or not that is happening is also something that is left to be debated. So I think the federal government needs to really go back to look at the drawing board and see what are the river basin authorities really doing. How do we also handle transboundary water cooperation between us and Cameroon, for example? And who needs to be held responsible for this kind of
Yes,
activities and
indeed, Aaron.
cooperation?
All right, so let's talk
Yes.
about the long-term consequences of repeated flooding, on food security, economic development, and also human settlement patterns, in affected regions of Nigeria. How can we prepare for these changes? If you can answer in like 30 seconds, please.
Thank you. Preparedness have to come from several layers. There's where the government comes in, and there's also where the individuals come in. So I would like to focus on the individual because it seems that governments are not really interested in this conversation. So for us as individual, waste management is actually a very good, huge one, especially in places where there are huge waste. Evacuating drains and then having clear passageways for water to flow is a very huge one. And also the fact that we also build on existing floodplains is also a huge issue because these are the boundaries of the rivers. I'm going to build on these places is a clear ignorance of land use policies. So if we choose to build on those places, we should also know that our infrastructure have to be different, and we have to install things like stilts, for example, to be able to be high up and more than the water levels, right? So these are some things that I think at the communal level ways that we can address flooding. Tree planting is also, overflowed, but it's also a very huge way of reducing runoffs and what have you. If you can, and if you live in flood prone areas, please relocate. If you are able to do so, please relocate and move to higher grounds. And I think those are immediate steps that we can take
Okay.
in curbing immediate floodings.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us on this, Aaron.
Thank you, Dashin.